Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super Fantify. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm gonna talk about Demon Lord 2099 Season 1, Episode 10. Sorry, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So we're picking up immediately after last episode, and we see Hizuki getting ready for work and thinking about everything last episode. For her, it's just she doesn't even want to feel like she feels like she's probably deluding herself and wanting to get close to people. Once again, it feels like she looks at herself as cursed, like I cause problems for those around me. So just on the regards of my family standing and my standing where it currently is, but also she just probably feels like the people closest to her always get hurt. So she doesn't even want to fathom the idea of getting close to anyone, because this might be the first set of friends she's ever really, or people who's really interacted and been nice to her in God knows how long. So, but yeah, obviously picking up where the last episode left off, we have her in front of everybody, and Takahashi is so excited because it's like, oh my god, my dreams have come true. Like, this is the best. But Vettel had to tell Hizuki, it's like, yo, we're here as your customers, as your master, not your schoolmate. So she has to do the whole performance thing. She has to shift in from Hazuki to, was it Yamada is her maid name here. So it's like she had to shift into that mode and do what that other maid was doing, the whole like super kawaii like performance and stuff. And so she has to do it, and everyone's celebrating how awesome she's doing it. I love that if you look in the background, that lady, I think she's maybe considered an orc or whatever, but like she ends up punching that one guy, and the other guys are almost like back there hyping it up. And I'm like, is that, I guess maybe it's supposed to be kind of like a part of the experience, I guess. I'd assume so. It's kind of like probably that tsundere experience, like, oh, you gotta, like, you're probably paying for like the tsundere Maid package or something like that. Because I'm like, it just randomly, while Hizuki's doing her thing, just in the background you'll see her punching that one guy, and I'm like, I don't know if that was just her just popping off on her own, or whether that was her playing into a performance. Because I was thinking like, oh, maybe they were getting super hyped about what Hizuki was doing and she was getting jealous and pissed, but it seemed unrelated. I was like, we're just not going to acknowledge what's happening in the background. It's just happening in the background. So either way, everything ended up being good, and so they sat down and with Hizuki, and we learned a little bit more about the regalia's past. So first and foremost, the items were actually something connected to Graham. The goddess Meldia like gave him them along with territory and all this other stuff. But then, as we learned, like from Graham, is like, right, I think it was Graham that told that story about himself, right? Or was that someone else that told that story? I think it was Graham, who talked about like basically the king banished him because he was like, yo, you're too popular. You might be trying to aim for my throne. And so he got banished. But before he did, he passed a crown. He gave like the crown to the next like person. And that became like the next king of, what's the place called? It's like Louvel or something like that. I can't remember now. But those three items were given to him, and he eventually gave those three items to his sons, which is interesting. I'm like, oh, so all three great houses are all related. They all stem from the same lineage because that's their ancestor. Just each one of their ancestors is one of his children. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I would have never thought that. Would have thought they came from like way different bloodlines, which I think makes sense, but also makes it sadder that those bloodlines eventually started beefing. But it's like, right, when you stem from basically all, like, you know, when it comes to power, everyone's always going to want more. It's like, we were never going to keep this so peacefully, evenly divided, because everyone's going to feel like they deserve a little more, or whether they believe they deserve it or not, they're always going to want a little more. So it kind of led to clashing. And obviously over the more recent years, it's become more peaceful. But Hizuki says, like, right, she doesn't have the orb, and she it's so interesting because you see her demeanor change. She was almost like shocked, but then she would just kind of like brush it off and be like, yeah, like, you know, we no longer have the orb, so that went down with my reputation. Plus she's doing the whole thing too when she's grabbing like her yellow or, you know, gold or amberish eye. And Vedal keeps noticing that because he keeps hearing that voice saying like, I'm sorry, and we don't know what that's in correlation to. Like I said, I feel like something or someone else is inside of her body, like co-occupying it. I'm not, the example I think of, it's not a fully equatable example, but if you've ever read or watched what is it, Rosario plus Vampire, one of the main leads in the series, her name is Mocha. She has two different forms. She has inner Mocha and outer Mocha. without getting into the nitty gritty of it, basically it's pseudo two different personalities occupying the same body. So I'm wondering if it's kind of a similar thing with her, but maybe this other person that's dormant inside of her is dormant and is only slightly waking up because the whole I'm sorry thing. I guess another example of that would be like the whole, well, if you want to go by Kingdom, I was about to say Kingdom Hearts wise, I guess it'd be no different from like all the people that are inside of Sora. I mean, it's mainly like, I mean, what it stemmed from initially was at least Sora and Ventus before you add in the complications that are, well, Roxas and Shion, you know, and all of that stuff. But either way, just other medium parallels I'm using as an example to wonder if that's what's happening in her situation. It's just like, yeah, there's something or someone else that probably had a physical body of their own is now there. Well, we also know that the item, we find out later on that each of those three items is actually like, they're not just like special items. They're actually born from the goddess herself, that they're all like fractions of her soul that she broke off and to make these items. So it could easily be the goddess speaking through Hizuki. And that might also kind of make Hizuki special too, because once again, I reiterated this point like maybe an episode or two ago, was the fact is that Vetol did mention the fact is he was like, she does have a massive pool of like energy in her, she just can't quite access it because she's like, oh, I can't use magic. But he's like, no, you have extreme power in you just probably can't tap into it. And I'm wondering maybe that's a byproduct of it. So either way, that's kind of where things currently stand, and kind of like I said, giving us background on the three houses. And so Vetol wants to meet with the current head of one of the other families outside of Trat and Hizuki. The guy's name, is it Corne or would it be pronounced like Cornea? Like that guy. And Hizuki will play introduction for them, but they're like, you know, in town eating, but then like they start gaining some reputation. Well, notice because it's like, oh, like there's people notice like, oh, aren't those academy students? And I guess like maybe everyone who attends the academy probably are higher echelon people. You're probably from like some noble family or some sort, maybe. And so like the way people are looking, because obviously they recognize Suzuki as like, oh yeah, from House Reynard, but like I'm curious, like they were kind of, because even some cops came to kind of accost them. Specifically, it was because Hazuki was there, but they also were like, you know, Makina, Takahashi, and Veltal were all kind of getting side-eyed too because they're academy students, but they were really making a point to go after Reynard, but luckily Tratz showed up and kind of dissuaded all of that. I love before that all went down. I mean, we got a little like world building where it's just kind of like, right, genetically modifying like pigs and chickens are very expensive, so like there are other substitute meats used that are a little less expensive. One of the things they ended up eating was dragon meat, which I love that Vetol and Makina were like, well, that'd be like eating one of our brethren, so we kind of don't want to go down that route, because I think maybe they were referencing one of the dark peers was a dragon or something like that. But yeah, it's like, oh, but they tasted it and they're like, oh, well, so-and-so wasn't immortal, so we'd be able to eat this meat all the time. And it's like, oh, but the meat would vanish or whatever, and they're joking about it. It's just like, yeah, just being themselves. But either way, Trat ends up having this one-on-one conversation with Hazuki. I thought was going to be something a little sinister, but turned out not to be the case. But obviously, you know, appearances can be deceiving, but it turns out Trat is trying to adopt Hazuki, and it seems like it's something that's been going on for a while. She's like, hey, I've known you ever since you were born. I've always been by your side. I just want you to know, like, you know, I can make you happy, you know, but Hazuki's reservation is, me becoming a part of your family is going to cause some issues amongst the other nobility. My being a part of your family will stain your reputation with the other nobles. And also for her, it's like, but I also, because for her, it's like, if I become a part of your like home, it's going to make House Reynard disappear. And she's like the only person left representing House Reynard. And it's like, not just for my own sake, but for my mom and dad, I have to keep House Reynard alive. And Trat's kind of like, okay, and pieces out. But I was like, yeah, I start getting a little suspicious, because I was like, yeah, it almost feels like she knows something more is going on with you and she wants to use you. Now, whether that has something to do with like I was bringing up before, like maybe the goddess is still a piece of herself in you, like maybe the regalia orb fused with her, kind of making her part the goddess or something. Like maybe there's something going on there, but not less Trat's trying to like absorb. I mean, once again, there is a whole conversation of like, yeah, the three houses have like battled over stuff for a long time, and it's like she's the only holdout left of House Raynar. Despite how far they've fallen, she could be a means to an end for Trat in so many ways. It's like by absorbing you, technically that gives my house the more power, even though she's on her house has lost a lot of its power and reputation. It's still the thing of it benefits her. Plus, she could get the whole whatever it is that might be special about Hazuki. Because they did run into her later on. It was like Makina and Takahashi. And they saw her like, oh, Headmistress Trat. And she just kept walking. I'm like, that feels like that's set up for her to be revealed to be a villain. Of like, oh yeah, I'm pretending to help you, but I've got my own ulterior motives. Because even her willingness to give Vetal the sword was like, well, we know like they were never going to stress about it too much because the orb was missing, so you're always going to be short one of the regalias, but it's still like her willingness there, and just now trying to adopt Hazuki. I mean, she's probably been doing it for a while, but it just, all this just makes me feel suspicious of her, especially because like Cornea, like however you say his name, was kind of saying like, right, Trat is one of those people who is all about keeping things the way they are, whereas he wants to change things. He doesn't like the way the city works. Which, speaking of him, I thought was interesting when we had that breakdown about his circumstances. He's a goblin and not an elf, and the reason is because the previous head, I guess, never had any successors and died, but like took him in. And it's like, because he's like, yo, it's like I was a merchant and I crawled and clawed my way to the top, and then like this person took an interest in me and took me in, and it's like, yeah, and ended up herring and everything. So he doesn't have a lick of the noble bloodline, because the noble bloodline died with his predecessor. So he's just kind of like, I guess they adopted bastard child, and I mean, bastard child would imply like he has the blood in him, but it's like, he's like an outsider brought in. So it is a really interesting circumstance. So, but it's like, who do you really trust? Like I said, I'm kind of getting feelings like we shouldn't trust Trat, but can we really trust this guy too? I don't know. He seems kind of like very trustworthy. He does seem like he wants Hazuki's best. But also Trat feels that same way too. But I'm more suspicious of him than him. But I'm also willing to be like, yeah, everyone's out for themselves, because he made it clear, like, yeah, Trat's all about wanting things to stay the same. I kind of want to use the power to change things. So he's like, I'm all for opening that place. Like, obviously, you want to use it, obviously, because you're not really after the treasure. You're more so about everything that will lead to world domination for you. But yeah, because it's like, once again, we found out about how the regalias work, and basically because essentially it's a piece of the goddess's soul fuses with the person. So the only way it can be given up is if the person relinquishes it or dies. And Vital's like, oh, so I'd have to kill you to take it. And everyone was on edge, and he was like, oh, I'm just kidding, I wouldn't do that. And the guy's like, oh, I really like your style, guy. So, but he wants to talk to Vital alone, and he's like, okay, basically me, Trat all know that the orb, whether it's missing or not, is still somewhere in this city, because being in a relatively close enough area, like none of us can pinpoint its exact location, but each one of them having the other regalias makes it so that they can sense that it's somewhere in this city, but the person who would have the key to finding it is Hazuki. Like I said, it's probably like right under their noses. So Cornea might not know, but Trat might know what that is, that it might be just her herself has become the regalia or fused with it. I mean, it is kind of like a part of their soul, so it already naturally fuses with them, but once again, Hazuki's situation might be weird and different, and we'll have to wait to find out the truth of that, because it seems like the whole point of getting all three of the regalia together is basically you're kind of performing a summoning ritual to summon the goddess herself. And that plays into the next episode, because I think the next episode title is like the goddess's reincarnation or something like that, which makes me feel like Hazuki might be like the host body for that, with whatever her situation is, that other voice and everything. So that's why I'm kind of playing into like maybe like the goddess, to some form of the goddess. Like there is some kind of rebirth happening here with the goddess inside, which is so interesting, because Cornea is all about, the city going through a rebirth, because it's been stale and stuck on, very traditional values that he doesn't jive with, essentially. So, but yeah, like he says, like he owes Hazuki's dad a huge favor, and Hazuki's dad died before he could pay back that favor. So he's looking after her for her sake. So he's willing to work with Vital in that regard. So it's like, and gave him all this information. So we'll see who can really be trusted and who can't in the grand scheme of things. So that's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. I also love that little bit with Machina. She goes to like a store and she sees her book is on sale. I wonder how many of the copies did she buy. I wonder, did she not know it got published? Like maybe she wrote it and sent it to somewhere but didn't know it got published, or she just wasn't expecting it to be published in the store. Like it might be a thing of it just didn't sell that well, so only like the hardcores know it, or maybe it just didn't sell at all. I don't know how many copies she bought, but she was so embarrassed about it she didn't want Takahashi to know. I love that she's like, oh yeah, we could get some more secondhand manga. But yeah, her and Takahashi had this really interesting conversation too, because she was asking Takahashi, like, is it really okay for you to come along with us? Aren't we interrupting your whole school thing? It's like, no, I have a good enough amount of credits, so I'm in a really comfortable spot. So yeah, I wanted to tag along. And it's like, feels like she definitely had her own ulterior motives. I guess because she really likes Vital and Machina and doesn't want to be away from them, but might run a little deeper than that. I don't know. Maybe there's something else she's planning on getting out of this. But it led to this conversation about how Takahashi was like, oh, you talk about me like you're the elder person. And she's like, well, I am your elder. And it's like, well, because you've been around a long time, you're technically a lot of people's elders. And it's like, she's like, it's ironic because she's like, I was actually, because it's like, she's like, technically I was the youngest of the dark peers. Well, she's like, technically, because like, technically she's the second youngest because there was someone younger than her, May. But she's like, May had complicated circumstances, so she wasn't necessarily like a newbie. But it's like, yeah, she thought of May as like her little sister. And Takahashi was like, oh, interesting. And she's like, what's wrong? She's like, nothing. And I was like, oh, was she getting a little jealous? Or does Takahashi have some ties to the dark peers that she's never told? Like, the fact is, like, that whole thing kind of, I mean, I don't think Takahashi ever really, maybe she did earlier in this, like a couple episodes back earlier in the season, I'm just not remembering. I don't think she's ever really touched on the subject of family. So I'm wondering maybe that's why she was kind of a little jealous of like, I mean, that might also be the thing. She's finding like a true family with with Vital and Machina, and she's kind of too embarrassed to admit that. Or maybe there's, like I said, there may be a little bit more to it. Like I said, maybe she has some ties to the dark peers in some shape or form. Like there's I mean obviously there are some of them out there, and Machina and them don't know where any of them are. She's just praying like, oh, I hope wherever you are, Maid, that you're okay. But I don't know, it was just an interesting thing that I'm like, was Takahashi just like a little bit jealous of knowing like, oh, Machina has someone else that's kind of filling that void. Maybe I'm not the sister character. I mean, I don't think it takes away Takahashi's importance to Machina, but I'm curious to see what that ends up being. But yeah, I love that the end of the episode is like, well, we'll just have to stick with Hazuki, and obviously Cornea like gave us his support, so technically whether we have his regalia or not, we'll kind of have to wait to see. But yeah, everything's kind of coming up in our favor. So yeah, let's go relax. It's getting pretty late, and because like I said, Machina wanted to go to a secondhand bookstore and get some more dojin. Vital wanted to go to the arcade, but it's getting pretty late. So, hey, let's go to Hazuki's place. And they all go to Hazuki's place, and the last shot of it is them in like either like a hot tub or like a sauna type of situation together. And she's just like, how the hell did we get here? I don't know if Machina or Takahashi are there. The only people we saw was Vital and her. So I'm wondering, was she already in there and then Vital let himself in and just kept it moving? Like, who's like, oh, why be embarrassed? Who cares? I mean, I'm sure like for him it's like, with his dark peers as well as any subject of his, it's always been like, hey, let's kind of let it run free. Let's not be embarrassed, or maybe that's what it is. We'll have to wait to see where the next episode takes us. But like I said, I believe it's called like the goddess's reincarnation or something. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens there. I think I also brought it up. I believe there's only 12 episodes for this season. I keep always making that mistake because I'm always conflating. Like, was I thinking on another show? But I'm like, I think this is only 12. So this might be the penultimate episode of the season or whatever. We'll see how things shape up and play out. But I'm excited to see what revelations we get unveiled next episode and how this all plays out and where it goes from here. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.